morning. Today we will go on with the third class of the course. This part is very captivating because we are talking about an era of heroes, because the conditions and the epic conditions they produce original logic. So the logical paraconsistent elements in medieval logic, we are focusing in the main authors, because Middle Ages, Western Middle Ages is huge, more than 1,000 years. And in our research, we have studied key authors of the medieval period, focusing on primary sources, results, and scholarly literature that are related to contradiction and to the principle ex falso sector quodlibet, and that are pertinent to the history of paraconsistent logic. Scholastic logic is marked by the close proximity to grammar and metaphysics. One sees an intense debate on the validity of the ex falso at the center of the doctrine of topics, theories of implication, and the obligationist disputes. The analysis of positions for and against ex falso is essential to the history of paraconsistent approach in scholastic logic. Aristotle, as we have seen yesterday, is responsible for the two sides of the quarrel concerning the ex falso. Affirmatively, when in the prior analytics, second book, second chapter, the Statirian supports that true conclusions are possible from false premises. And negatively, when Aristotle, 2 chapters later, affirms and analyzes that contraries does not follow the same. The Aristotelian argumentation has impacted debate about the conditional in medieval logic and has motivated the refusal of the ex falso by many authors. We will first present some of Boetian bases of the medieval logical theories very concisely. And the Boetius is a fundamental character in this history because he is the link between ancient sources and medieval authors. Boetius is very important to medieval philosophy and also logic and medieval logic. Boetius was the person, is the person that made, create, translate English, Greek vocabulary about philosophy, especially about logic, into Latin. And doing so, he is responsible for many of the vocabulary we have today. He left seminal elements for the various positions for and against ex falso also that are found in the scholastic phase of medieval logic. Here we have a piece of art, and because Boetius had a project to translate all Plato and all Aristotle into Latin, but he has a precocious death. So he has been in jail and he has been executed in, we don't know exactly, between 500 to 24 or 26 before Christ, after Christ. First, Boetius' commentaries and translations, and he has his own textbooks on logic, on reporting, explaining and transmitting Aristotelian, and make some fusions and some confusions between peripatetic legacy in logic, stoic legacy in logic, Megaric legacy in logic, and after all this combination, the medievals has inherited Boethius' impressions about a lot of matters, subject matters, especially the notion of logical consequence. For example, the first legacy of Boethius is Philo's definition of conditional. That was famous, especially by Boethius' influence, was adopted by several medieval authors. But on the other side, Boethius calls attention to the Aristotelian passage of prior analytics B4, a very important authoritas in order to refuse the exhaust. Here we make a jump because we are seeing projected in the screen John of Salisbury quotation from Metalogicon. That is a very impressive text from 12th century, written in 1159. John Salisbury quotes an Aristotelian sect based on Boethius' translation. The source, says John Salisbury, the source, however, is given by Aristotle. In the same way, I was there for that by means of others' industry could be have problems. Moreover, Boethius says that has been accepted as a source of invention, this that Aristotle says in Analytics. The same when be and not to be, not necessarily to be the same. This is the Boethian version of Aristotelian red lines of yesterday. But we have other evidence of reception of these ideas. For example, Peter Abelard, a good example of the assertion of John of Salisbury. In Dialectica,
John of Salisbury was a student of Peter Abelard.
Peter Abelard. We don't know exactly, historians don't know still today, when Abelard has written his Dialectica. A lot of hypotheses before the attempt, after in the first stay in Paris, in the second just closer than his dad. We don't know. But John Salisbury was pupil of Abelard in the second time he has taught in Paris. He has taught in Paris in two occasions. First, in the beginning of the century, the first decade, and in the third decade. He has retired from Paris for about a decade. Abelard says, Aristotle, when seek to deal with the meaning of a hypothetical proposition, he has demonstrated a necessity, as in this rule concerning hypothetical proposition, that he showed in this way. The same when is and is not necessarily is not the same. As if could say that in face of the affirmation and of negation of the same does not follow the same consequence. So in these 3 or 4 pieces of quotations in historical tradition, we can see how a cryptic Aristotelian authoritas has been received as and adapted reinterpreted, maybe, original Aristotelian statements that have been disputed by interpreters about the actual meaning of the quotation. So we start now with an author, Garland of Besançon, or Garland, the computist. This person is a fellow of Abelard. We don't know. Probably they have had some contact, in touch with each other, but we don't have much more information about. The first writers to discuss the ex-false sector codelipti or ex impossibili sector codelipti were Garland of Besançon and Abelard, early 12th century. From the 13th century, there was an intense debate concerning the validity of some consequentiae that were later accepted. And in this debate, one can find the quarrel over the legitimacy of the ex-falso. We consider Garland of Besançon one of the earliest authors to prepare the path and to properly discuss the role of the ex-falso sector codelipti, make it central in philosophical context of the medieval times. According to Yukio Iwakuma, we assume that Garland of Besançon, a contemporary of Peter Abelard, wrote his Dialectica some years before Abelard's writings were produced. This paper is a masterpiece of historiography in medieval ages. We recommend the reading if someone has the curiosity to know how it's difficult to deal with these sources. This edition was the critical edition of the manuscripts of Garland of Besançon. It was prepared by Lambertus Marie de Ric, published in 1959. Garland, the computist, was for a time, due to the attribution of de Ric, considered the author of Dialectica, an important treatise of scholastic logic and one of the oldest extant in complete form. Recently, based on new findings and improved knowledge of author and authors of the period, Iwakuma has proposed a complete revision of both the attribution of the authorship and the period that to which this work in fact belongs. Three aspects of the...
May I observe?
Yeah.
In our Portuguese book and in Evandro's PhD thesis, we mentioned, we have a special session concerning Garlando's Compotistas, Dialéctica, and we have discussed the ex-falso according to Garlando Compotista. But after the PhD thesis, there is only a few months and years, we discovered this paper by Iwakuma, Yukio, and we have researched and we began agreeing with Iwakuma that de Ric, Lambertus de Ric, an authority on Middle Ages, especially on these authors, he was mistaken. Garlando's, the one we are discussing, is not Garlando's Compotista. We have read several papers and we are convinced. This Garlando's Compotista was a bishop in Agrigento, in Magna Graecia, in Italy, but the one who is the author of Dialéctica is not Garlando's Compotista, he is Garlando's of Besançon, a little older, but contemporary to Peter Abelard. This is very interesting. Could you show? We have just published by Edukacja Filozoficzna in Poland recently a paper discussing this question and presenting tables from the logical point, contemporary logical points of view. We have discussed this Garlando's Besançon and his analysis concerning the meaning of conditional and implication. And we have argued that Garlandus is a forerunner, a precursor of Paraconsistent logic, because his interpretation for implication is relevantist. He was a relevant logician.
As the most medieval authors, they have the relevantist approach. At least the half of the authors adopt a definition of consequence that is of has relevance character. This is the paper that Itala has mentioned. So, three aspects are important of we highlight here because there are a lot of other details concerning Guerlain in French, logical theories. So, first, the way the author approaches certain topical inferences in a view to selecting logically acceptable inferences. This feature is found in Abelard and many other authors in the 12th century, and even after, because they make formal logic, but they don't make it formal logic formalistically. Okay, they have to they always as possible always than needed. They require intentional the content of the linguistic items that are employed in the argumentation. The second, his analysis of notion of logical consequence, and finally the definition of implication that may be deduced from his notion of consequence. In Dialectica, Garland states that a consequence is true in 4 ways and introduces 9 semantic clauses for the veracity and falsity of the consequence or logical implication. It is not the designation of the truth values for the antecedent and consequent in conditional proposition that decides the truth of the consequence, of a consequence. For Garland, what determines the soundness of the consequence is either the content of the consequent is properly contained or comprehended, understood in the antecedent. The logical notion of the notion of logical consequence or implication assumed by Garland is not truth functional and requires that the premise must be relevant to the conclusion. Garland's notion of consequence has a connective feature also, that is, his notion demands the containment relation between the antecedent and the consequent. Garland does not admit, as far as we know, that from the false or from a contradiction there follows any other proposition whatsoever. As the author himself repeatedly rejects in this truthful his exposition, stating that certain inconsistencies produce inconvenience between terms and harbor sophistry. It's important to stress that these authors have a relevance vein, but they are not dialectists. Okay, they don't argue that the principle of non-contradiction does not hold at all. Nothing. I don't know any author in Middle Age that has been such a defense. But it's not decisive for Paraconsistent is not decisive for that decisive for recognize broad sense paraconsistency in these offers. Gerland seems to suggest that a stricter notion of consequence is required. The same will be passed with Abelard. Relevance.
Okay, Abelard doesn't seem. He claims.
He claims, yes.
He's
In
the first one
Gerland, all these points such that are I don't know, between the lines. We can interpret, we can extract these conclusions from the source. But Abelard is explicitly, he is dealing directly with the problem with the ex falso, because the ex falso induces inconvenience in dialectical theory. But Gerland seems to suggest that a stricter notion of consequence is required, and relevance paraconsistent elements seem to orient Gerland's logical options. The theoretical tradition represented by Gerland of Besançon is in opposition to the statement of the ex-falso sector codelete, thus marking out a broad sense paraconsistent approach throughout the later Middle Ages. Peter Abelard may be considered the most skilled and creative medieval logician. We are much more maybe familiarized with William Vulcan, Jean Bouvidan, and the other symbolistas and the authors of 200 years after Peter Abelard. Abelard has worked with much lesser material than the future authors. For example, Abelard does not have access to the complete content of logical theses from Aristotle, for example. It is in the context of topical inferences and the maximal propositions that the rejection of the ex falso by Abelard is evident. Here we have to recall very concisely, at the time of Abelard, at the time of Gerland, we have today maybe an idea that medieval logic is syllogistic. But this is medieval logic is a lot of other things. And syllogistic is not, for example, the 464 pages of Dialectica of Abelard, syllogisms have just 40 pages. Because theory of topics that was also systematized by Aristotle and after by Cicero in Roman Empire, Stoicism, and after by Boethius. All this topical tradition was the main source for example, Abelard and the other in his time, source for the logical discussion of the matters. And topical discussions, for example, to give a plain example, for example, when we say that the whole is greater than the part, this kind of maxim is a kind of, it's a topic, a maximal proposition. A proposition that we can use to produce good arguments. That is the strategy. And in this thesis, the authors have almost 30 axioms, maximal propositions like that. And Abelard, when he is analyzing the soundness of these maximal propositions, he find out inconveniences, wrong conclusions from the premises, and sustained by topics, or topics associated with weaker notions of implication that allows sophistry. So he remedies the situation, changing the notion of logical consequence, making it stronger, stronger and stronger and stronger. He makes 3 movements in the dialectica to improve the situation, and at the end he has a very strong and logical consequence notion that is strongly relevant, strongly paraconsistent in broad sense. His topic of investigation leads Abelard to propose new semantic criteria for the notion of necessary consequence, consecutio necessitas in Latin, understood by some medieval authors in the manner of the contemporary material implication. He departs from what today we call material implication and reaches other. He creates, in fact, other notions, other criteria for implication. Christopher Martin, for example, says that in dialectica we have the most creative pages of the whole history of logic concerning implication, concerning inventive discussion. So other feature very interesting in Abelard's character is that Abelard has a confident attitude before the ancients, because people at the time of Abelard, they feel that the ancient thinkers, Aristotle, Boethius, and many other authorities before them, they were wise enough. There is no new points to create in logical theory. But Abelard, by his own style, says that the ancients were not so good that we cannot make improvements. And with this attitude, he faces the problems we are discussing now. Abelard refines his notion of necessary consequence, demanding the condition of inseparability. He intends to protect his theory from inconvenient consequences. Abelard suggests that a stricter notion of consecutio is necessary. This passage, lines here, pages and lines of dialectica, and the antecedent of a true declarative conditional sentence requires the consequent intrinsically. We can match this definition with the Chrysippus. It's very close. But Abelard reaches this definition alone. He don't have any access to the Chrysippus and the other stuff, because the scarcely absence of primary sources at the Abelard's time. Inferences whose antecedents are impossible are logically possible, but they are false. This picture is a mural at Sorbonne in Paris. Abelard teaching to his pupils. For Abelard, the ex falso is not valid, and from the false and from the impossible, any consequence whatsoever does not truly follow. relevant and paraconsistent elements seems to orient Abelard's logical options. Quoting Aida Huda, the first student of Newton da Costa, he has director of the Mathematics Institutes here at Unicamp. Christopher Martin openly rejects the idea that medieval logic was paraconsistent. Martin says, the logic of Middle Ages were never paraconsistent, but there was an urgent reason for denying that in general, everything follows from a contradiction. Nevertheless, it is precisely this principle which must be annulled or limited for a logic to be paraconsistent. Our conclusion is that Martin does not know how much about paraconsistency. But this text this conclusion of him is old. I don't know. We don't have in touch with him. But his research is respectable, and we don't have any prejudice about it. However, Martin, for his part, believes that the idea of relevancy is the true basis of these discussions, and we agree with it. But
probably he didn't know that relevance is not consistent.
Yeah, because there is
if a system is relevant, then it is paraconsistent.
Yeah, there is a link between the two fields in theoretical logic. Some other medieval authors of the 20th and 13th centuries rejected the ex-falso. The veto on the ex-falso can be placed within the panorama of metaphysical, logical, epistemological approach of a paraconsistent character in broad sense. Followers, for example, of Robert of Melun, the Melundinenses, adopted as a basic principle of the theory of consequence the following statement from the Ars Melidona: nothing follows from a falsehood. Nothing follows. We think that is not consistent at all, because nothing, when we have falsities, blocks the process of getting conclusions. Robert of Melun, again, the Hickey, Lambertus Marie de Hickey is the guy. Is we can say that the field of research in the 20th century, the historical research in medieval logic depends on his work, because he was the major manuscript hunter of the 20th century, has supervised the students, created an entire field of investigation. Authors who refuses also ex-falso: Robert Bacon, Henri Bergin. Anonymous treatises is very common in the period, because people, the cover of the books, the manuscripts, as happens with us, the cover is the first part of the book that is lost. So the name of the persons goes with the covers. The manuscript of Peter Abelard Dialectica at the National Library, French National Library in Paris, also the manuscript doesn't have Peter Abelard Dialectica, because he starts at the first page, and in the first pages we don't have more the names of the people. And there are other reasons. If I have time, I can make some comments in brief. Peter Petrus Hispanus Sumulae Logicalis was recently we have an Oxford new translation into English, Summaries of Logic, by Copenhagen, Terence Parsons, and more at the UCLA. Was decisive in guiding logic teachers and students and in establishing a corpus for logical theories in scholastic times. Petrus Hispanus was simply the most important author of medieval ages in terms of textbooks, because his textbook on logic was widely used in all Europe, and he has made the first, he has been the first book of logic of many other famous logicians of medieval age, for example, William Sherwood, for example. There is a polemic if Petrus Hispanus was the Portuguese Cardinal Pedro Julião, who was elected the Pope John 21.
He would be the only Portuguese Pope.
It would be the only Portuguese. No, there is, in fact, this Pope has been enthroned. He was a Portuguese, Pedro Julião, the Cardinal. But what we don't, there is a lot of indecidable polemic about is if Petrus Hispanus is the Pope. And this picture from Giovanni Paolo, for example, is one of pieces of evidence that maybe not. Because here we have a scene of the paradise in Dante chant 12, the tale, for 15th century, a bit closer than us, than the facts, okay? And the guy with the green book is Petrus Hispanus, the logician that comes to the paradise, coming to the paradise. But he has not been represented as a pope. Here we have a bishop. If he had been a pope, maybe he would be painted differently. We don't know. More else. Anyway, the significance of the...
Comment?
Yeah,
we didn't maintain a position in our English book, but according to our research, we prefer to consider that Petrus Hispanus was the Pope. There is a quarrel if he could have been a priest, a Spanish priest.
Yeah.
This is the discussion. He would not have been the Pope. He could have been a priest from near Sevilla, I think.
Yeah. I think
Who lived at the same time.
Yeah, there's you can see in the literature that is an epopeic situation, epic situation.
We mentioned this in the book. We mentioned.
Yeah, because it would be very I don't know, be very good if a person who has written one of the most famous books in history of logic would be also a pope. But in the last 40 years at least, we can sustain this position because a lot of controversy concerning the identity of the
and
person.
this pope was fantastic. He was a Sir John. It's in the literature that he used it to make cataracts surgeries.
Yeah.
But it seems that he was murdered.
Yeah, because he was staying at the Peter's throne just for a year, and he was he has been dead in an accident. The ceiling of his office studio has fallen down over him, and he died. A lot of history, very interesting, but we don't know. In fact, Middle Ages history of philosophy, of logic, of other topics are plenty of gaps, misinformation, false pathways. It's a labyrinth.
And his book was the most studied during many years.
Yeah, this slide summarizes the position of this textbook in history of logic. The significance of the summaries of logic for the history of logic is enormous. Composed in the second quarter of the 13th century, between 30 and the 45, the Tractatus became the standard manual for logic until the end of the Middle Ages. Still in Renaissance, for example.
John.
Finish your sentence, please.
Oh.
Finish your sentence. Sorry.
For example, until at the beginning of the Renaissance, Petrus Hispanus has been used in several European universities.
Just to mention, one of the members of the Center for Logic, Antônio de Freitas, is an expert on Petrus Hispanus Portucalensis. That's how we call him.
Yeah.
Anyway, what you have described seems not to be gaps in history, but gluts.
Gluts. Yeah. I agree. Yeah.
Antônio de Freitas was supposed to come to this meeting, but he has a health problem.
Oh.
Cancer.
Thank you. I agree. Yeah, Gluts, it's a very good description about this kind of situation, because the gap is absence of information. And in the case of the Peter of Spain, Petrus Hispanus Portugalensis, we have superpositions, contrary evidence superposing what we could decide about his identity and the history of tests. This is not a minor question. It would be very important to could decide this situation, but it is not easy. Petrus Hispanus does not have composed just the summaries of logic. Recent translation, very nice translation, from Copenhagen, Norman Parsons, 2014. But he has other, we had others written by him, and Petrus Hispanus analyzes in a text called Sim Categoremata that anything whatever follows from the impossible, and that what is necessary follows from anything whatever, or idest, the ex impossibility sector codality, ex codality sector necessarium. This second one is very familiar to us that we study logic today, because it is the following formula. In fact, Middle Ages, these two principles were a couple, duplex, the two sides of the same coin. Ex falso, sector codelibit, A and not A implies B, and the necessarium, ex codelibit, sector necessarium. That is, if A is the necessarium, then anything implies what is. This is the two propositional versions updating to our way of writing. So it is fantastic that in most propositional logic, intuitionistic, classical, modern summary formulations of logical theory, propositional calculus almost have this one as an axiom. And it's very famous, this formula. We know it in textbooks, and no, just more one formula. No, this formula has a history, and it is associated to the X false. If you accept X false, you accept this, and vice versa. They are complementary. And his rejection is associated to his conception of consequence. Like Abelard, Spanus holds the position that conditional propositions express a necessary connection. In Latin, also as in Boëthius, this necessary connection is called consecutio, consecution. We have modern words that comes from this one. The identification proposed by the author between the true conditional and the necessary conditional, and between the false conditional and the impossible conditional, explains in part his rejection of the X false. Petrus Spanus makes these elements more evident in his analysis of the relation of consequence expressed by syncategorematic particle C, in another word, the syncategorematic. According to Petrus Spanus, the particle C expresses a relation of causality and antecedence, in which one signifies in the other or for the other. In the sense, the antecedents carry within it the meaning of the consequence. Again, the relevance approach arising. For Petrus Spanus, the relation of consequence between a consequent and an antecedent is not limited only to the definition of valid consequence. Some topical bases must be involved, such as the relevance between antecedent and the consequent. It is precisely this point which impeded Spanus from accepting the X false. And in the time of Petrus Spanus, X false was almost universal consequence, widely accepted by logicians. William Vulcan is certainly one of the most celebrated, proeminent and celebrated medieval philosophers. Although his role in the logic of the period in a certain way is sometimes overvalued, it is fair to say that his contribution to logic is meritorious and justly adds to his fame as an incisive, intellectual, and bold philosopher. In his Summa Totius Logicae, William Vulcan rearranges medieval logical theories in a way that was quite advanced for the time, especially with regard to the theory of consequences and of the properties of the terms. Vulcan assumes a result that places his logic theory under the edges of paraconsistency. The author excludes the X false from the list of valid formal consequences, relegating it to the circumstantial domain of material consequences. This restricted condition of the X false is directly linked to the lack of utility that Vulcan attributed to the rule. Yeah, and I in the next slide I will show you the quotation when he says it textually. Vulcan, in stating and justifying the rules for valid consequence, is not solely concerned with formal aspects. He constantly appeals to other elements of a semantic metaphysical character that are important to the inherent properties of the propositions and of consequence in question. He relegated the X false to the circumstantial and restricted scope of material consequences, or to consequence whose validity is due to intrinsic or extrinsic elements. Our first conclusion is that Vulcan's theory of consequences is formally paraconsistent in the broad sense, since the ex falso is not formally valid, being restricted to the context of non-formal consequentiality. The cornerstone of paraconsistency in William Faulkner appears in the following passage. Our translation of the original Latin with the help of Will, other rules are given, such that for the impossible anything follows, and that the necessary follows from anything. The second one, the two. And for this reason, it follows that you are an ass, therefore you are God. And furthermore, it follows that you are white, therefore God is true and one. Such consequences, however, are not formal, so these rules are not widely accepted, widely used. So this is the report of William Faulkner of situation of the rules in his time. We are talking really later scholastic logic, 14th century. O concept of consequentia simplex requires certain semantic substantial connection between the antecedent and consequent. This connection is captured in our theoretical framework by relevant implication, which is semantically more demanding than material implication. The semantic demands seems to incline our author more to the former than to the later type of implication, that is, to a kind of relevant implication. The following author in your plot is Nicolas of Autrecourt, that has born in Autrecourt-sur-Aire in France and died in Metz. He studies art in Arts Faculty of Paris, maybe in the time of John Buridan, earning his master's degree in around 1320. He obtained a degree in civil law outside of Paris, returned to Paris as a theology student and became a baccalaureatus and licenciatus in theologia. He lectured at Paris. It seems that Walter Burleigh was one of his teachers. Nicholas had faced enormous difficulties before church authorities have been...
Nicholas of Autrecourt is a novelty in our English book.
Yeah.
He doesn't appear in the Portuguese version because we have discovered him very recently, and it was a hard research, but very interesting.
Yeah, I will try to tell the most important findings in this, to tell this history too. Nicholas was prosecuted by church and was one of the most famous cases of censure, academic censure at the University of Paris. Until today, at Sorbonne in Paris, there is a circle in the floor that was marking the chapel where was the chapel where Autrecourt has burned his writings. Yes, there is a circle.
His writings.
His writings. Yes, thank you. Do you know papacy for about almost a century stayed in France in Avignon, and this but Autrecourt and other intellectuals in France, Central Europe, near at the reach of church authorities, and he was prosecuted. The trial resulted in the condemnations of Autrecourt's views as heretical. Nicholas was sentenced to burn his writings publicly publicly and recanted somewhere about 66 propositions or articles from several of his writings, which were designated false or erroneous, suspect, presumptuous, dangerous, or heretic. The official proceedings, but one of the main sources of the extant Auto-Organização propositions are found today in the Vatican archives because of the condemnation, because the writings were burned.
Everything was burned. And so we found the proceedings of the condemnation. And there we have read the 66 propositions and the articles in order to understand why he had been condemned. And in general, it was because he was Paraconsistent.
Yeah, because Auto-Organização in the 14th century, we had a kind of Aristotelian purity, Aristotelian purism in philosophical field in Europe. So people who put themselves against Aristotle's authority, and just after also the great synthesis between science and theology made by Thomas Aquinas, that made all difference to make enemies of Aristotle, adversaries of Aristotle, also adversaries from church. So this complex situation has impact over Nicholas Auto-Organização. The document that contains the 66 articuli condemnati is called Instrumentum Publicum, and there is just one copy in Vatican Apostolic Archives. Among other Protestant writings, there is a correspondence with the Franciscan theologian Bernard of Arezzo and with a certain Master Gilles.
No one knows who had them.
Yeah, possibly Gilles de Fenot, and a treatise that has come to be known as Exigit Ordo. Again, the Hickey, the man, produces the critical edition, gather all the manuscripts and sources, and produces this beautiful monument to the memory of Auto-Organização, published in 1994. Among Auto-Organização writes 9 letters to Bernard of Arezzo, but we have copies of only 2 of them. The other 7 letters have been lost, but there are fragments of them in the Articuli Condemnati, because the prosecutors were very formal, and they quote carefully all the statements in the sentence.
We intend to write a paper about this story.
About this story.
And about the logical
meaning,
questions.
Importance, yes. According to Calusa, letters between Nicholas and Bernard are dated in either the academic year of 35, 36, or in the next one, 13, 36, 37, when both were theology students at Paris. At this time, they were engaged as opponents in each other's Principia. Principia, it's a kind of inaugural lecture on sentences, whose theme was the validity of Aristotle's principle of non-contradiction, as presented in Book Gamma of the Metaphysics. It was a kind of a disputation, public disputation involving this theme.
Pour autre cours.
Huh?
Pour autre cours, on account of these disputations.
Yeah.
The thing began.
Yeah. In his first letter, Bernard of Arezzo, Nicholas had already addressed the certitude, the first principle. However, it is in his second letter to Bernard that he enunciates the principle of non-contradiction, which for Autocur is an absolute principle of inductive evidentness and the foremost principle which no other true law can oppose. The 6 corollaries explained by Nicholas in the letter are fundamental to our interpretation. Nicholas states, for example, in every evident inference reducible to the first principle, by many steps as you please, the consequent is factually identical with the antecedent or with a part of what is signified by the antecedent. Again, the convergence into in the direction of relevance notion of implication. Nicholas also states, for, as I have said, in a valid inference, the consequence should be identical in its meaning with the antecedent, or with a part of what is signified by the antecedent. In presenting Autocur's discussion of valid consequence in the light of reasoning,
He calls
natural light. The natural light, the Enlightenment seeds were planted much centuries before, because Autocur is considered as one of the first modern authors of Middle Ages. Modern in the sense of modernity, because his defense of empirical role in empirical stuff to make good explanations, and the adversity of Autocur with Aristotle is mainly focused in denying substance, accident, metaphysical structure of describing the world. This is the main difficulty, main difference between Autocur and Aristotle. In presenting Autocur's discussion of valid consequences in the light of reasoning, natural light, the principle of non-contradiction, we have highlighted how does discussion serve as the basis for his philosophical positions, including having led him to refuse the theories of the prime matter of Aristotle and Averroes. Nicholas of Autocur, as far as we have been able to ascertain, and according to the interpretation that we proposed here, does not ever mention the ex falso sector caudality, which was already well known in his time. However, in view of his concept of valid conditional and of the conclusions we have arrived at above, we consider that we can say that he did not accept the ex falso. Autocur was a contemporary of John Buridan and Pseudo-Scotus at the time when the classical paradigm and the ex falso seemed well established. Nevertheless, more than 200 years later, after Peter Abelard, Autocur defends Abelard's position regarding the connective conditions for the validity of the conditional. It is in this sense that we think that for Nicholas Autocur, the conditional is relevant and thus can be considered from a contemporary point of view paraconsistent in a broad sense.
A very quick observation. Here's an example, João Marcos. In your work you mentioned systems in which the principle of non-contradiction is valid, but the system is paraconsistent. You have examples. He was completely classical. For him, the most important principle is the principle of non-contradiction. And for him, any justification whatsoever, if for it to be a good justification, it must be reduced to the principle of non-contradiction. But he claims the implication, the consequentia, must have relevance between the antecedent, the content, the matter of the antecedent and the consequence. And so he's classical from the point of view of the importance of the principle of non-contradiction, but he doesn't accept the so-called material, the Aristotelian material implication.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Just a clarification, because it was mentioned. All the systems that I present and I will ever present in this course at least, the principle of non-contradiction is valid.
It's valid.
The pure form of the principle that I present is just a statement about consequence, and it's valid for the one-dimensional systems that I present. It has nothing to do with no contradiction. Never had.
Never had. Yeah. It's incredible that these authors could grasp the wrong way, the right way.
I'm not sure that Peter Abelard accepted the principle of non-contradiction completely in his discussion.
I don't know.
I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, because Peter Abelard is very inventive, very inventive ingenious in logic. So we have surprising positions, surprising analysis of the topics. Now we are in the second and final part of the, but it is much, it is a minor part of the presentation, and we will talk now about some very important people that have defended ex-falso in Middle Ages. John Salisbury, the same that reported us that first excerpts, attributes to Adam of Bauscham, originally from Beauvais, and now as Parvipontanus of the Small Bridge, the thesis that from a contradiction follows the same. Idem as the same, idem as comes from contradiction. A thesis which implies the ex-falso, which generalizes it. This is a front page of one of the editions of this. This is an autobiographical writing, very, very beautiful. We know a lot of things about 12th century logic, at Paris at least, because of John Salisbury writing. It also appears that William of Soissons, to the dislike of John Salisbury, disseminated the teaching of his master, Adam of Bauscham, according to which, from an impossibility, everything follows, a thesis which is corollary of the ex-falso. We don't have surely that this image would be of Adam of Bauscham, but it is so represented in some sources. The other thesis of Soissons' master, that the follow from a contradiction, was already familiar to Abelard, who sought to neutralize it. The Williams machine is a deduction of the ex-falso very similar to of the Clarence Lewis one that we will see that in the slides. And medieval logicians made deductions exactly the same as we have done in 20th century. Other people that are favorable to the ex-falso, Bellic of Paris, Nicholas of Paris, Matthew of Orleans, John Lepage, Robert Quartby, Walter Burdick. These two, the last, for example, great commentators of Aristotle, great authors in Middle Ages. John of Buckingham, for example, he is...
Evandro, sorry, again. Graham Priest, who will arrive tomorrow, he published a paper arguing that the first person to mention the ex-falso was William of Soissons. We are arguing against this position.
Yeah.
It was not William of Soissons. It was his teacher, Adam of Bauscham, and we have documents proving that. But it seems that Graham nowadays is agreeing with us. After
I think
discussing
so.
with us,
I
yeah.
think so. Yeah. Yeah. This is the background of the discussion. Yes, because it is very dangerous in this period attribute because maybe I don't know. I'm not sure that Adolf Bauschel is the inventor. Because it belongs to...
No, the first one to mention, but disagreeing
yes.
with it was Peter Abelard.
Yeah, disagreement is Peter Abelard
was Peter Abelard.
is very incisive.
But who disagrees knows the law, and discusses the law.
Discusses
and so
the law.
the first
Yeah.
one to discuss and to know the law
Yeah.
was Peter Abelard.
John Buridan is one of the most influential philosophers of the late Middle Ages. The influence of the logical theories developed and expounded by Buridan are of enormous importance, and they became part of official curricula of several European universities. The idea that logically false propositions imply any other proposition, as we have explained, was already a widespread view in Buridan's time. Buridan defines different degrees of necessity in his writings, and which are decisive in characterizing the logical consequences related to these notions. Buridan exhibits an exact case of ex falso, thus providing an important nuance to the principle he clearly endorses. For Buridan, the ex falso would remain effective and valid, and at the core of his logical theory, except in the cases in which what is the possible is compatible with the impossible, which permits its deduction. For example, if a donkey flies, then it has wings. Do you understand what is happening at the end of Middle Ages in terms of logical theory? They know that ex falso works. It holds, but they can't ignore the fact that the connection between antecedent and the consequent cannot be ignored. So even authors as Buridan, what we can call it, consider him totally classical, almost totally classical, when he are arguing about the topic, his examples are such that even in impossible, there have to be some adherence, some coherence. And in Renaissance and in the still in 16th century, we have Iberic authors such as Pedro da Fonseca and Domingo de Soto, Portuguese and Spanish authors, that Soto openly criticizes the position in favor of ex falso, and Fonseca also uses this kind of examples. So it is one of the reasons I wanted to show you this point. As a proficient interpreter of Aristotle, Buridan does not exempt himself from analysis B15 for prior analytics, and he says, the last power, which we usually call the syllogism from opposites, is the ability of a syllogism to infer from opposed premises the predication of the same about the same, but negatively. So it shows that the chapter B15 was not ignored, because Buridan belongs to a time that all Aristotle's tests are available, and a very different situation considering the previous authors before him. Buridan's position, both in relation to the ex-falso and in relation to the syllogism from opposite premises, points to a typical theoretical configuration of those results in a logical, classical theoretical context which, if not yet consolidated, is in the process of consolidation. And a guide that we will talk now. I think in 5 minutes I can finish the discussion. Yeah. Sim, yeah. Yeah. At the beginning of the 20th century, ex-falso was attributed to John Duns Scotus, the Doctor Subtilis, because a clear and proficient statement of this law is found in the commentaries on the prior analytics and the posterior analytics. And this comment was Jan Łukasiewicz in his famous book on syllogism that attributes to Duns Scotus the ex-falso, but is not from ex-falso. It's not from Duns Scotus, because Duns Scotus is not Duns Scotus, and this it not belongs to Pseudo Scotus, because it belongs to a lot of 2-3 centuries before. The texts are this, in Opera Philosophica of John Duns Scotus, published in 17th century, Lucuating, but these two treatises in the beginning of the Opera Omnium. But in questions on the prior analytics, today attributed to Pseudo-Scotus, and questions to the posterior analytics that I don't know if it has received an attribution today. When Scotus' complete works were re-edited again in 26 volumes by Vivet at the end of the 19th century, these commentaries were there included. However, based on a careful examination of the material initiated around 1936, Ephraim Lompré, a Canadian scholar, these works were attributed to another author, a Pseudo-Scotus. This new viewpoint was sanctioned by the Vatican edition of Scotus Opera Omnia that began to be published in 1950, and is now in its 8th volume, in which these commentaries and another dedicated to the posterior analytics were excluded. There the now logician analyzes and interprets on the basis of false and the opposite premises some of the Aristotelian results relative to syllogisms. There is some questions. Questions are chapters, discussions, very technical discussions in medieval style. Question 6, question 10, question I don't know 11, in which the author, the Pseudo-Scotus, discusses these points. And the wrong understanding of the issue has prevailed by the present day, because Łukasiewicz, not having taken into account these revisions in his celebrated study of Aristotelian syllogism, promulgated the hypothesis that the ex-falso, that he called the law of Duns Scotus, could be attributed to the Doctor Subtilis. Due to the prestige of the great Polish logician and historian of logic, his eponymous attribution was replicated in numerous other scholars, and it is almost always wrong in logical textbooks over worldwide. So it's a very famous case of lack of history background and a lack of historical commitment to make textbooks better. Because this kind of error, we cannot, it's not fair to repeat. I think that is something that is not accurate. Pseudo-Scotus is one of the most intriguing personalities in history of logic.
May I suggest you to stop? Because
Okay.
this question is so interesting. You are not going to finish in 5 minutes. You have
Because we have started 10 or 15 minutes before.
Okay.
But I think
Okay, you
because
finish, and tomorrow we discuss quickly the question.
Yeah.
Okay.
Pseudo-Scotus, unfortunately, Pseudo-Scotus would be one of the famous personalities in the history of logic, because his commentary is genius. His commentary we are talking. He is wiser than talented. He developed in a extremely elegant way various logical theories typical of his period. But we don't know who is. In our discussion, we particularly analyzed the aspects of his theory of consequences which are connected to the ex falso, such as inferences which involve impossible or contradictory antecedents. In the conclusions relative to the fourth part of the 10th question on questions on prior analytics, there appears the celebrated statement of ex falso. Although Pseudo-Scotus was not the first to enunciate it, we was for some time during our era admitting it as such. We consider that his argumentation explains in part the merit of achieved by this exposition. Aside from the ex falso, some of its corollaries are stated in these conclusions of the Pseudo-Scotus discussions, such as that which postulates that the necessary follows from anything whatsoever. Pseudo-Scotus states, concerning the fourth part of the question, the first conclusion is, in face of every proposition you want, which implies a contradiction from the form, follows other proposition in formal consequence. But this red lines doesn't match with this formula. Because this formula, loosely speaking, it would be considered equivalent. In this first conclusion, claims that the ex falso holds as formal consequence of the form. And that is the case even with the change of the categorical, categorematical, or syncategorematical elements in the formula. The form that is ex falso, according to Pseudo-Scotus, is very different than this. But the logical meaning is the same. If you have something, an antecedent which implies a contradiction, then this antecedent implies anything. C is the corresponding to the B in this form. And secondly, but equivalent interpretation for the original formulation of the ex falso, it could be thought as in a proof theoretic scenario. Because medievals, they work at the meta language, and in meta language it's not so. Sometimes they are talking about what seems to be implication. Sometimes they are talking about consequence relation. So both formulae seem to be suitable to the text of Pseudo-Scotus, and they perform a plain valid logical rule or law in the core of his theory of consequences. The demonstration of these results is interesting. So let's stop today. Tomorrow we resume from this these slides because the deduction. This is the deduction we find in Pseudo-Scott's test. In the earlier slide, textually here formalized, and all you know that we can find this deduction in famous texts, logic texts from 20th century. And to finish, I think I would need to say is that very curious that without a history, we have the illusion that we are beginning everything from the beginning, from zero, and it's not true. Okay, thank you very much.